Your Honor, Mrs. Carter has no evidence. The words landed softly in the courtroom, but they carried the weight of a door being locked from the outside. Daniel Carter did not smile fully, because men like Daniel had learned that open satisfaction looked ugly in front of a judge, but the corner of his mouth lifted just enough for Emily Carter to see it from across the aisle. He sat at the polished oak table in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her first car, his silver watch catching the fluorescent light each time he adjusted his cuff. Beside him, Vanessa Cole sat perfectly still in a cream blazer, her blonde hair pinned back, her hands folded over a designer purse like she was attending a charity luncheon instead of a hearing that could decide whether Emily kept the last pieces of a life Daniel had tried to erase. The courtroom in Charleston County was cold enough that Emily could feel it through the thin navy fabric of her dress. The air smelled faintly of paper, floor polish, and old wood, the kind of smell that made every whisper seem louder than it should. Behind Daniel, his sister, his uncle, and two family friends sat shoulder to shoulder, all of them dressed in soft grays and expensive restraint, all of them looking at Emily as if she had wandered into the wrong room and should have been embarrassed enough to leave. Emily kept her hands in her lap. Her left thumb moved once across the pale line where her wedding ring had been. Then she stopped herself. No more old habits. No more touching the ghost of something that had never protected her. At the other table, Rebecca Hayes, her attorney, did not react to Daniel's lawyer. She was a narrow woman in her mid-40s with calm gray eyes, a black suit, and a legal pad filled with handwriting so neat it looked almost insulting in a room full of lies. A closed manila envelope rested beside her elbow. It had been there since the hearing began, untouched, unannounced, almost invisible. Emily had looked at it only once. That was enough. Judge Margaret Whitmore peered over her glasses at Daniel's attorney, a silver-haired man named Preston Vale who had spent the morning polishing Daniel's story until it shone like something expensive and false. According to him, Emily Carter had been a dependent wife, a woman with no financial understanding, no role in Carter development, no claim to the house on Rutledge Avenue, and no reason to appear in probate court except bitterness. He had said it all gently, which somehow made it worse. Cruelty dressed in manners was still cruelty, just with better tailoring, because apparently civilization had decided that was an improvement. Mrs. Carter has had every opportunity to provide documentation, Preston continued, turning slightly so the gallery could hear him. She has produced nothing credible. No ownership agreement. No loan contract. No written promise from the late Mrs. Eleanor Carter. Only feelings, Your Honor, and feelings do not transfer property. Daniel lowered his eyes, performing humility with the skill of a man who had practiced in mirrors. Vanessa leaned toward him and touched his sleeve, a small public gesture of loyalty. Emily watched it without blinking. 5 years ago, that touch would have split her open. 3 years ago, it would have made her sick. Today, it told her only one thing. Vanessa still believed Daniel had told her the whole truth. That was almost sad. Almost. Judge Whitmore turned to Emily. Mrs. Carter, do you understand what has been presented? Emily felt the room lean toward her. Daniel expected panic. His family expected pleading. Vanessa expected tears. Even the court clerk paused with one hand above the keyboard. Emily took a slow breath, the kind Rebecca had taught her in the parking garage that morning. In for 4 counts. Hold for 2. Out for 6. She did not look at Daniel. She did not look at the people waiting to watch her fall apart. She looked at the judge and said, Yes, Your Honor. Her voice was steady, low, almost too calm. That seemed to irritate Daniel more than anger would have. He shifted in his chair. Preston smiled, thin and satisfied. Then, unless opposing counsel intends to waste the court's time further, we ask that the petition be dismissed. For the first time all morning, Rebecca Hayes closed her pen. The tiny click cut through the room. She rose slowly, one hand resting on the sealed envelope. Daniel's smile weakened. Vanessa's fingers tightened around her purse. Rebecca looked at the judge and said, Your Honor, Mrs. Carter has been quiet because we were waiting for Mr. Carter to finish his version of events. She lifted the envelope. Now we are ready to present the final evidence. 5 years earlier, before the courthouse, before the sealed envelope, before Daniel Carter learned that silence could be more dangerous than shouting, people in Charleston used to call his marriage to Emily a perfect match. They said it at rooftop fundraisers overlooking the Cooper River, At Sunday brunches where the coffee cost $9 and everyone pretended not to notice. At charity auctions where Daniel stood under warm lights and spoke about vision, legacy, and community with the smooth confidence of a man who had never had to wonder whether the electric bill could wait until Friday. Daniel was handsome in the polished, Southern businessman way that made older women trust him and younger men imitate him. He wore navy suits, knew which donors to flatter, and had the rare gift of making ambition sound like public service. Emily stood beside him in soft colors, smiling when required, remembering names he forgot, smoothing over insults he delivered too casually, and quietly fixing problems he never admitted existed. If Daniel was the face of Carter development, Emily was the steady hand behind the curtain, though naturally the curtain got more applause than the hand, because apparently society has learned nothing from stagecraft. Their home on Rutledge Avenue had been bought during the third year of their marriage, a white-columned house with deep porches, creaking floors, and a magnolia tree that dropped waxy petals across the front walk every spring. Daniel called it proof of how far he had come. Emily remembered the down payment differently. She remembered wiring $75,000 from the investment account her father had left her, because Daniel had promised it was temporary, because the bank needed liquidity on paper, because he had kissed her forehead and said, "We are building this together, Em." She believed him then. Believing him had been the language of her marriage. When Carter Development nearly collapsed after a failed hotel renovation outside Savannah, Emily was the one who sat at the kitchen island until 2 a.m, sorting invoices, calling vendors, begging for extensions, and drafting apology letters Daniel later signed, as if they had come from his own noble soul. She sold a small beach lot in North Carolina that had belonged to her mother, then moved the money into Daniel's company account in 3 separate transfers, because his banker said it would look cleaner that way. Daniel called her his miracle in private. In public, he called her supportive. Supportive sounded sweet enough until Emily realized it was the word powerful men used when they wanted to turn a woman's labor invisible without sounding ungrateful. Eleanor Carter saw more than Daniel knew. His mother was not warm in the easy way people expected from older Southern women, but she was observant, and observation is often mistaken for coldness by people who prefer not to be seen clearly. Eleanor would sit at the far end of Emily's dining table during family dinners, watching her daughter-in-law refill glasses, redirect tense conversations, and quietly rescue Daniel from every financial detail he had failed to understand. Once, after Daniel had taken a phone call on the porch and left Emily alone with a stack of unpaid contractor notices, Eleanor placed one thin hand over the papers and said, "Make copies of everything, dear." Emily had looked up, startled. Eleanor's face had not changed. "Love is lovely," she said, "but paper is what survives in court." At the time, Emily had laughed softly, because court felt like another country, a place for other people's disasters. She did not know that years later she would sit beneath fluorescent lights, listening to Daniel tell a judge she had contributed nothing. She did not know that Eleanor had already begun keeping her own file. Eleanor Carter had never been the kind of woman people described as sentimental. She sent handwritten thank you notes, remembered birthdays, and hosted Christmas dinner with silver that had to be polished for 3 hours before anyone was allowed to breathe near it. But she did not waste affection on display. In Charleston, that made people call her dignified. In private, Daniel called her difficult whenever she saw too much. Emily had once believed Eleanor disliked her. It was an easy mistake to make, because Eleanor's approval arrived in fragments, never in warm speeches. A nod across a crowded room. A quiet correction of someone who mispronounced Emily's maiden name. A check made out to Emily's favorite literacy charity, mailed without explanation after Daniel forgot their anniversary dinner and then blamed traffic, as if traffic had also ordered him to silence his phone for 4 hours. Eleanor did not comfort in the usual ways. She documented. That was her love language, which sounded ridiculous until Emily learned how much of the world is saved by women who keep receipts while men are busy calling themselves visionaries. After the hotel project almost ruined Carter Development, Eleanor began visiting the office more often. She said it was because the downtown humidity bothered her knees less than the damp air near the Battery, but Emily noticed how her eyes moved over everything. The unpaid invoices stacked in Daniel's assistant's inbox. The revised ownership charts left carelessly on the conference table. The way Daniel's smile tightened whenever Emily asked a practical question in front of his partners. Eleanor saw how he corrected Emily with a laugh, making her intelligence sound like a charming accident. She saw how people laughed with him because money had a way of turning cruelty into entertainment. One Tuesday afternoon, Emily found Eleanor alone in Daniel's office, standing beside the copier with 3 folders tucked under her arm. The room smelled of toner, leather, and Daniel's expensive cologne. Eleanor did not look embarrassed. She simply handed Emily a duplicate set of papers and said, "Put these somewhere he cannot reach." Emily stared at the pages. Bank transfers, contractor agreements, early drafts of the Rutledge Avenue purchase documents, a copy of a letter from the bank acknowledging Emily's personal funds as part of the down payment. "Why are you giving me this?" Emily asked. Eleanor's expression softened by a fraction, which for Eleanor was basically a parade with balloons. "Because my son has inherited his father's pride and none of his restraint." Emily wanted to defend Daniel. Habit rose in her like a reflex. He was stressed. He was under pressure. He was not always careful with words, but he loved her. Eleanor seemed to hear every excuse before Emily spoke it. "Do not confuse being needed with being valued," she said. "Daniel needs you. That is not the same thing." The sentence stayed with Emily for years, buried under dinner parties, apologies, and the exhausting labor of keeping peace in a house where peace was mostly her responsibility. Eleanor kept her own file in a locked cabinet at her attorney's office. She saved emails Daniel believed had been deleted, including one where he told his accountant to move Emily's contribution off the visible books before the refinance. She kept the first draft of the trust amendment, the one that named Emily as a beneficiary before Daniel insisted his mother was being manipulated. She even recorded a formal statement with Rebecca Hayes, who had represented Eleanor quietly for more than a decade. Emily knew none of this then. She only knew that Eleanor watched her with a sharp, sad patience, as if waiting for Emily to stop mistaking endurance for love. The last time Emily saw her before the divorce became public, Eleanor stood on the porch of the Rutledge Avenue house while Daniel took a call inside. The magnolia petals were falling across the steps like scraps of old wedding lace. Eleanor took Emily's hand, pressed a small brass key into her palm, and closed her fingers around it. "For a safe deposit box," she said. "Not now? Someday." Emily almost laughed from confusion, but Eleanor's face stopped her. "There will come a day when Daniel tells a room full of people that you were nothing," Eleanor said quietly. "When that day comes, do not argue with him. Let him finish." The unraveling did not happen all at once. It came in polished little moments, each one easy to explain away if Emily wanted badly enough to keep believing. Daniel began taking calls in the pantry because apparently marble countertops had developed ears. He changed the passcode on his phone and said it was because of company security, which sounded important enough to silence a wife who had been trained to apologize for curiosity. He started coming home later from investor dinners with the faint smell of expensive perfume clinging to his jacket, not enough to accuse, just enough to haunt. When Emily asked, he smiled at her the way a teacher might smile at a child who had misunderstood a simple lesson. "You are tired, Em," he would say. "You are making stories out of stress." For a while, she let him. That was the humiliating part she would remember most clearly later, not the betrayal itself, but how hard she had worked to make his lies comfortable for him. Vanessa Cole entered their life as a marketing consultant for Carter Development, all glossy confidence, bright laughter, and opinions delivered as if the room had been waiting for them. She was younger than Emily by a few years, with perfect blonde hair and a talent for making compliments feel like small paper cuts. "Emily, you are so brave to keep things traditional," she once said at a company cocktail party, touching Emily's arm with manicured fingers. "Some women would be bored just being supportive." Daniel laughed too quickly. Emily remembered the sound more than the words. It had the sharp, false ring of a glass tapped too hard. Within months, Vanessa was at every meeting Emily used to help prepare for, every gala Daniel once asked Emily to coordinate, every photo where donors needed to see that Carter Development was fresh, bold, modern, and apparently allergic to wives over 35. Daniel began rewriting history in real time. He told board members that Emily had never enjoyed business. He told friends she preferred the quiet life. He told his family she was fragile, emotional, easily overwhelmed. The more he said it, the more people accepted it, because people do love a simple story, especially when the simple story lets them avoid doing anything decent. Then came the refinance. Daniel said the company needed flexibility. He needed Emily to sign a few papers to separate household assets from business liabilities. Preston Vale, already hovering at the edges of their marriage like a well-dressed vulture, assured her it was standard. Emily asked for time to review everything. Daniel's face hardened so quickly, she almost missed it. "After everything I have built for us," he said quietly, "you are going to treat me like a stranger?" Shame did the rest. She signed some documents. Not all. That small hesitation, that one stubborn thread of Eleanor's warning, would later matter more than Emily knew. 2 weeks after their 12th anniversary, Daniel told her he wanted a divorce. He said it at the breakfast table, while sunlight poured through the kitchen windows and the coffee maker clicked off behind him. He used phrases that sounded borrowed from a podcast about personal growth. They had evolved in different directions. He needed honesty. They both deserved freedom. Emily sat across from him in the house she had helped buy, at the table where she had saved his company one desperate invoice at a time, and realized he had rehearsed everything except her pain. Vanessa moved into the story before Emily had even packed her clothes. Not officially, not publicly, because Daniel still preferred his cruelty arranged tastefully, but everyone knew. By the time the divorce became final, Emily had lost the Rutledge Avenue house, her place in the social circle she had helped build, and most of the savings she had once believed were protected. Daniel's lawyers buried her in language. They called her contributions voluntary marital support. They called her father's inheritance commingled funds. They called her questions disruptive. Daniel called her unreasonable. The settlement left her with a modest condo on the edge of Mount Pleasant, a used sedan, and the strange quiet that follows a life being emptied by professionals. On the day she returned to pick up the last box from the house, Vanessa stood in the foyer wearing white and holding a clipboard of decorator notes. "I hope you find peace," she said, smiling softly. Emily looked past her at the staircase, the magnolia branches visible through the front windows, and the floorboards she had once chosen by hand. She wanted to say 100 things. Instead, she remembered Eleanor's voice. Let him finish. So Emily picked up her box, walked out into the South Carolina heat, and did not look back. For the first few months after the divorce, Emily measured her life in small humiliations and smaller victories. The condo in Mount Pleasant had beige walls, thin carpet, and a balcony that overlooked a parking lot instead of the magnolia tree she used to watch bloom every spring. The refrigerator hummed too loudly at night. The neighbors argued about visitor spaces. The elevator smelled faintly of wet cardboard whenever it rained, which was often because Charleston had a talent for turning weather into a personal insult. Still, the place was hers. No one could ask why she was reading bank statements at midnight. No one could tell her she was imagining things. No one could make her feel like a guest in a house she had helped pay for. She took contract work wherever she could find it, bookkeeping for a nonprofit on King Street, event planning for a historic preservation group, part-time administrative work for a local real estate attorney who paid fairly and did not speak to her like she was decorative furniture with a pulse. Slowly, painfully, she rebuilt routines that belonged only to her. She bought coffee in paper cups instead of brewing Daniel's preferred dark roast. She wore comfortable shoes to the grocery store without hearing a comment about effort. She learned that peace did not always arrive like a grand revelation. Sometimes it looked like eating cereal for dinner and realizing no one was there to criticize the bowl. Daniel, meanwhile, flourished in public. At least, that was the version delivered by society pages, charity newsletters, and people who pretended they were only mentioning him because it was relevant. Carter Development announced a new mixed-use project near Somerville. Vanessa appeared beside him at a ribbon cutting in a pale blue dress, smiling as if she had personally invented sidewalks. Daniel gave interviews about resilience and vision, which Emily found impressive in the same way a raccoon getting into a locked trash can is impressive. Irritating, but clearly committed. He never mentioned Emily, not directly. He did not need to. His silence did the work. In his world, she became a footnote, then a rumor, then a cautionary tale told over wine by people who had once eaten at her table. Then Eleanor died. The news came on a gray Monday morning in February, delivered through a local obituary Emily found online before anyone from the Carter family thought to call her. Eleanor Patricia Carter, age 76, beloved mother, philanthropist, preservationist, and trustee. The photograph showed Eleanor in pearls, her white hair swept back, her expression composed and unreadable. Emily sat at her small kitchen table for a long time, her coffee cooling beside her laptop. She did not cry at first. Grief with Eleanor was complicated, folded into gratitude, regret, distance, and the strange ache of being seen too clearly by someone only after it was too late to thank them properly. The funeral was private. Emily was not invited. That should not have surprised her, but it did. Some injuries are predictable and still find a way to sting, because humans are magnificently stupid about hope. 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived from Whitmore, Bell & Hayes, a law office on Broad Street. Emily signed for it with a pen that barely worked, then carried the envelope inside as if it might burn her fingers. Inside was a formal notice requiring her presence at a probate hearing concerning the estate of Eleanor Carter. Her name appeared twice. Emily Carter, interested party. Emily Carter, potential beneficiary. She read the words again and again until they blurred. That evening, Rebecca Hayes called. Her voice was calm, careful, and familiar only because Eleanor had once spoken her name like a warning hidden inside a favor. Mrs. Carter, Rebecca said, I represented Eleanor for many years. There are documents you need to see, but first you should understand something. Daniel is contesting them. Emily looked toward the balcony, where rain streaked the glass in silver lines. Contesting what? Rebecca paused. You're right to what she left you. By sunrise, Daniel had already turned the matter into a war. His attorney filed objections questioning Eleanor's capacity, Emily's motives, and the validity of several documents Daniel claimed he had never seen. Vanessa's name appeared in one affidavit as a witness to Eleanor's supposed confusion, which was bold, considering Eleanor had once described Vanessa as a woman who mistakes volume for substance. Daniel wanted the court to believe Emily had manipulated a grieving, elderly woman for money. He wanted the city to believe she had returned to take what was not hers. Most of all, he wanted Emily to panic, to argue, to look exactly as unstable as he had always claimed she was. Instead, Emily found the brass key Eleanor had given her, wrapped it in a tissue, placed it in her purse, and drove to Rebecca Hayes' office. Rebecca Hayes' office sat on the second floor of a brick building on Broad Street, above a stationery shop that sold wedding invitations thick enough to survive a hurricane and probably a few family scandals, which was convenient, given the neighborhood. Emily arrived 20 minutes early and sat in her car with both hands around the steering wheel, watching attorneys in dark suits move along the sidewalk with leather bags and hurried expressions. The brass key lay in her purse like a small, impossible weight. For years, she had carried it from one apartment drawer to another, wrapped in tissue, then in a small velvet pouch, then finally in the inside pocket of the purse she used only for serious things, interviews, bank appointments, funerals, and apparently the resurrection of truths Daniel thought he had buried. Rebecca greeted her without a smile, but not unkindly. Her office was narrow and orderly, with framed degrees on the wall, 2 filing cabinets, and a view of the courthouse dome between live oak branches. Nothing about the room tried to impress anyone, which Emily found strangely comforting. Daniel's lawyers always seemed to decorate their offices like they were preparing to intimidate visiting royalty. Rebecca simply pointed to a chair and placed a glass of water in front of Emily. Mrs. Carter, she said, before we open anything, I need you to understand that Eleanor was very deliberate. Emily took the key from her purse. Her hand was steady until Rebecca looked at it, and then it began to tremble. She gave me this before the divorce, Emily said. I thought maybe she was being dramatic. Rebecca's mouth moved almost into a smile. Eleanor Carter was many things. Dramatic was not one of them. Strategic, however, would be fair. They drove together to a bank on Meeting Street, where the manager led them into a private room with beige walls, a metal table, and the particular silence of places where people hide either valuables or evidence. Humanity being charmingly predictable that way. The safe deposit box was long, narrow, and heavier than Emily expected. Inside were folders labeled in Eleanor's precise handwriting. Rutledge Avenue Purchase, Carter Development Transfers, Trust Amendment. Daniel Correspondence. Rebecca did not rush. She photographed the contents, logged each item, and then removed a sealed flash drive in a small plastic evidence sleeve. Emily stared at her own name written across the first folder and felt something inside her shift, not relief exactly, but a loosening, as if a knot she had carried beneath her ribs had finally admitted it was tired. She believed this day would come, Rebecca said. Emily swallowed. Why did she not tell me everything? Because if you had known, Daniel might have known. Eleanor understood her son. The words were not cruel. That made them worse. Over the next week, Rebecca built the case quietly. Emily came to the office after work and sat across from her while documents were arranged into timelines. $75,000 from Emily's inheritance into the Rutledge Avenue down payment. $128,000 from the sale of her North Carolina Beach lot into Carter Development during the Savannah crisis. Emails from Daniel to his accountant. Drafts of legal documents showing Emily's interest before it vanished from the final version. A notarized statement from Eleanor explaining why she had amended her estate plan. And the flash drive, which Rebecca would not play in full until the chain of custody was confirmed, because apparently even justice has paperwork, and paperwork has paperwork, because civilization enjoys nesting dolls of irritation. When the hearing date arrived, Emily chose the navy dress because it made her feel calm, not powerful, not rich, not victorious, just calm. She parked 3 blocks from the courthouse and walked beneath a pale morning sky while church bells rang somewhere in the historic district. Daniel was already there when she entered, standing near the courtroom doors with Vanessa and Preston Vale. Vanessa glanced at Emily's dress, then at her shoes, and gave a small pitying smile. Daniel stepped forward as if he still had the right to occupy her space. "Emily," he said softly, "this does not have to be embarrassing." She looked at him for the first time that morning. His hair was perfect. His tie was perfect. His confidence was almost perfect. "Then do not embarrass yourself," she said. Rebecca appeared beside her, carrying a black leather folder and the sealed envelope. The courtroom doors opened. Daniel walked in first, as he always had, certain the room belonged to him. Emily followed, quietly, because Eleanor had told her long ago to let him finish. By 9:15, the courtroom had filled with the kind of quiet that only happens when respectable people gather to watch someone else be publicly reduced. Emily recognized half the faces in the gallery, donors from old charity luncheons, neighbors from Rutledge Avenue, 2 former board wives who had once praised her crab cakes with the emotional intensity usually reserved for medical miracles. None of them sat near her. That was fine. Distance had become useful. It showed her where the floor really was. Daniel sat at the petitioner's table with Preston Vale on one side and Vanessa on the other, arranged like a portrait of success commissioned by insecurity. His family occupied the first row behind him, his sister Caroline whispering behind one manicured hand, his Uncle James leaning back with the weary confidence of a man who believed old money could still discipline inconvenient facts. Emily sat beside Rebecca Hayes, her purse at her feet, her spine straight, the sealed envelope resting between them like a small, patient storm. Judge Margaret Whitmore entered at 9:22. Everyone rose. The scrape of chairs across the floor sounded louder than it should have, a brief chorus of obedience. When they sat again, Preston began with a performance so polished it almost deserved applause, or at least a refund for the theater ticket nobody admitted buying. He painted Eleanor Carter as a grieving widow in decline, vulnerable to outside pressure. He called Daniel her devoted son. He called Vanessa a stabilizing presence. He called Emily a former daughter-in-law who had reappeared only after learning there might be money involved. Each sentence was gentle, measured, poisonous. Mrs. Carter's claim rests on documents that raise serious concerns, Preston said, pacing slowly before the judge's bench. Documents allegedly signed by Mrs. Eleanor Carter during a period of confusion, isolation, and medical fragility. My client does not wish to dishonor his mother's memory, but he cannot allow that memory to be exploited. Daniel lowered his head at exactly the right moment. Vanessa placed a tissue in his hand. Emily watched the gesture and wondered how many rehearsals it had taken, because the timing was excellent and humans, tragically, reward choreography. Preston continued by describing the divorce as generous, fair, and final. He said Emily had received appropriate compensation for her role, as Daniel's wife. Not partner, not contributor, wife. The word was made to sound decorative, like a vase placed near the entrance of a house. He said there was no credible evidence that Emily had invested separate funds into Carter development. He said the down payment on Rutledge Avenue had come from Daniel's earnings and Carter family resources. He said Eleanor's late decision to name Emily in certain estate documents was inconsistent with family history and common sense. Common sense, Emily had learned, was often just selfishness wearing reading glasses. Then Daniel took the stand. He adjusted his tie before placing his hand on the Bible, his face solemn, his voice low. He spoke of his mother with careful sadness. He said Eleanor had become forgetful in her final years, misplacing checks, repeating questions, confusing dates. He said Emily had maintained inappropriate contact with her after the divorce. Emily felt Rebecca shift beside her, but neither of them moved. Daniel described their marriage as strained by Emily's resentment of his career. He said she had disliked the demands of business, avoided financial discussions, and preferred social events to practical matters. She was kind, he said, turning just enough for the room to see his regret. But she was never involved in the company. A murmur moved through the gallery, soft as silk dragged across a blade. Emily kept her eyes on the witness stand. She remembered the nights of invoices, the emergency transfers, the contractors she had begged not to walk away. She remembered Daniel asleep upstairs while she built the bridge he later crossed alone. Preston asked whether Emily had ever loaned Carter development money. Daniel hesitated only long enough to appear thoughtful. Not to my knowledge, he said. Rebecca wrote 3 words on her legal pad, then underlined them once. Emily could read them from where she sat. Let him finish. Daniel's testimony lasted 43 minutes. Though to Emily it felt longer, the way dental appointments and bad marriages tend to bend time for no useful reason. Preston led him through every carefully arranged memory. Daniel spoke about Eleanor forgetting appointments, misplacing her reading glasses, calling him twice in one afternoon about the same repairman, all ordinary signs of age polished into proof of incompetence. He described Emily's visits after the divorce as unusual, then concerning, then manipulative, each word placed like a brick in a wall he hoped would keep the truth outside. Vanessa testified next. She moved to the witness stand with delicate seriousness, as if carrying the burden of honesty had made her physically graceful. Her cream blazer was buttoned, her pearl earrings small enough to suggest restraint, and her expression held that expensive softness some people use when they are about to say something awful in a caring voice. She told the court that Eleanor had often seemed confused during the final year of her life. She said Eleanor asked repeated questions about the divorce. She said Emily had called the house more than once, though she admitted she had never heard the conversations herself. Mrs. Carter seemed very focused on what she believed she had lost, Vanessa said, lowering her eyes. It made Daniel uncomfortable, but he did not want to be cruel. Emily nearly smiled at that. Daniel not wanting to be cruel was a charming concept, like a shark considering vegetarianism. Rebecca remained still, her pen resting against the paper, her face unreadable. Preston asked Vanessa whether she believed Emily had influenced Eleanor's estate decisions. Vanessa hesitated, perfectly. I cannot know for certain, she said, which was the safest way to imply certainty without paying rent for it. But I was worried. Eleanor was vulnerable, and Emily had reasons to be angry. The gallery absorbed that with quiet satisfaction. People liked Vanessa's version because it asked nothing of them. It allowed them to keep Daniel as the charming man from fundraisers, Eleanor as the fading old matriarch, Vanessa as the devoted new wife, and Emily as the bitter woman who had failed to move on. Simple, clean, morally lazy, but very tidy. Then Caroline Carter took the stand, Daniel's sister, wearing a black dress and the expression of someone who had confused family loyalty with civic duty. She testified that Emily had always been uncomfortable with the Carter family's social responsibilities, that she often seemed overwhelmed at events, that Daniel had carried the burden of business alone. Emily was pleasant, Caroline said, glancing toward her, but she was never built for our world. Our world. The phrase moved through Emily like cold water. She remembered organizing Caroline's daughter's christening reception when Caroline had forgotten to confirm the caterer. She remembered sending sympathy flowers for Caroline's friend because Daniel had promised and then failed. She remembered writing thank you notes in Eleanor's voice after surgery because the family image mattered and everyone else was too busy being important. Not built for their world. No, perhaps not. Their world appeared to run on selective memory and linen napkins. By the time Preston rested his initial presentation, the room had shifted against Emily. She could feel it in the angle of bodies, the lowered whispers, the faint relief of people deciding they had backed the winning side. Daniel turned slightly as he returned to his seat, just enough to catch Emily's eye. His mouth barely moved. You should have taken the settlement. There it was, the Real Daniel slipping through the courtroom polish like mildew through fresh paint. Emily felt Rebecca's hand touch her wrist once under the table. Not comfort, not warning, just timing. Judge Whitmore looked toward Rebecca. Counsel, do you wish to respond? Rebecca stood. Yes, Your Honor. I would like to begin with Mr. Carter's statement that Mrs. Carter never invested separate funds into Carter Development. Daniel leaned back, still confident. Preston's smile remained fixed. Rebecca picked up a single page from her folder, not the sealed envelope yet, just one page. One small page, almost disappointing after so much theater. Mr. Carter, she said, turning toward the witness stand, do you remember the Savannah Hotel project? Daniel's expression changed by less than an inch, but Emily saw it. So did Rebecca. Generally, he said. Rebecca nodded. Then let us be specific. Rebecca's voice did not rise. That was what made the room begin to listen. Loud attorneys filled space. Careful attorneys changed its temperature. She approached the witness stand with the single page in her hand, letting Daniel look at it just long enough to recognize the bank logo at the top. His face did not collapse. Daniel was too practiced for that. But something tightened around his eyes, a tiny betrayal of the body, which apparently had less loyalty to his lies than his mouth did. Mr. Carter, Rebecca said, on March 3rd, 5 years before your divorce was finalized, did Carter Development receive a transfer of $42,000 from an account ending in 7169? Daniel glanced at Preston. Preston stood immediately. Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation. Judge Whitmore looked at Rebecca. Counsel. Rebecca handed a copy to the clerk. Bank certified record, Your Honor. Produced from the safe deposit materials maintained by Eleanor Carter and verified with Palmetto National Bank. The judge reviewed the page, then nodded. Overruled. The witness may answer. Daniel cleared his throat. I do not recall every transaction from that period. Understandable, Rebecca said. There were many emergencies then. The sentence was mild, but Emily felt it land. Daniel heard it too. Rebecca placed another page on the evidence table. Let us try April 17th. Carter Development received another transfer of $56,000 from that same account. And on May 2nd, another transfer of $30,000. That totals $128,000. Do you recall those transfers? Daniel's jaw moved once. The company had multiple sources of capital. That was not my question. Preston shifted behind his table, suddenly busy with documents. Vanessa looked from Daniel to Rebecca, her expression still composed, but no longer soft. I said I do not recall, Daniel answered. Rebecca nodded as if he had given her exactly what she expected, because he had, poor man, walking himself into the garden rake of truth with both eyes open. Then perhaps this will help. She lifted a second document. This is the closing statement from the sale of a beach lot in Beaufort County, North Carolina, owned solely by Emily Carter before her marriage to you. Sold for $134,000. 6 days after that closing, the first transfer was made to Carter Development. Are you saying that timing was coincidental? Daniel leaned toward the microphone. Emily and I were married. Money moved between us as part of normal household support. Household support, Rebecca repeated. For a commercial hotel renovation in Savannah? A few people in the gallery stirred. Someone coughed, badly pretending it was not discomfort. Judge Whitmore's pen paused over her notes. Emily kept her hands folded, but beneath the table her fingers pressed together until the nails touched her palms. She was back in that kitchen, the glow of Daniel's laptop on the island, the unpaid contractor list spread between them, his voice tired and urgent as he said the company only needed a bridge. Just 60 days, Em. Maybe 90. You know I would never let you lose anything. Rebecca returned to the table and picked up a third page. Do you have a written loan agreement showing that Mrs. Carter intended those funds as a gift to the company? Daniel's mouth opened. then closed. It was not handled that way. So there is no loan agreement. Not that I am aware of. No gift letter. No board resolution acknowledging separate funds contributed by your wife. Emily was my wife. Rebecca looked at him for a long second. That does not make her inheritance your operating budget. The words moved through the courtroom like a clean blade cutting ribbon. Preston rose again, but slower this time. Your Honor. Judge Whitmore lifted one hand. Mr. Vale, sit down unless you have a legal objection rather than emotional discomfort. For the first time all morning, a few faces in the gallery turned toward Emily with something other than pity. Curiosity, maybe. Unease, definitely. Humanity occasionally arrives late and poorly dressed, but one takes what one can get. Rebecca was not finished. Mr. Carter, earlier you testified that Mrs. Carter was never involved in the company. I am showing you an email dated May 10th, sent from you to your accountant. Please read the highlighted sentence. Daniel took the page. His fingers bent the corner. Silence stretched. Read it aloud, Rebecca said. Daniel's voice was lower when he spoke. Move Emily's contribution off the visible books before the refinance. Vanessa turned toward him sharply. Caroline Carter stopped whispering. Emily stared at the grain of the table because if she looked at Daniel then, she might finally let him see how much those words had once cost her. Rebecca stepped back. No further questions on this document, Your Honor. Not yet. Vanessa's head turned so quickly toward Daniel that one pearl earring caught the courtroom light like a tiny warning signal. For the first time since she had entered the room, her expression was not arranged for public sympathy. It was startled, almost offended, not because Daniel had hurt Emily, but because he had failed to tell Vanessa. Which lies required maintenance. There is a difference, and humanity, being the comedy of manners that it is, often mistakes one for the other. Rebecca let the silence remain just long enough to make Daniel sit inside it. Then she walked back to her table and selected another document, this one clipped to a printed email chain. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to recall Ms. Cole for a limited line of questioning related to asset transfers made before and during the divorce proceedings. Preston rose before she finished. Objection. This is beyond the scope of the estate hearing. Rebecca did not look at him. It goes directly to motive, credibility, and Mr. Carter's effort to characterize Mrs. Carter as a person with no legitimate financial interest in the assets later addressed by Eleanor Carter's estate documents. Judge Whitmore studied the email chain for a moment, then looked at Vanessa. Ms. Cole, please return to the stand. Vanessa stood carefully, smoothing the front of her blazer with both hands. Her confidence had not disappeared, but it had become something thinner, like ice over dark water. She took the oath again, sat down, and crossed her ankles beneath the witness chair. Rebecca approached with the politeness of someone setting a table before serving poison in crystal. Ms. Cole, you testified earlier that you were concerned Mrs. Carter was attempting to influence Eleanor Carter for financial reasons. Is that correct? Vanessa glanced at Daniel. Yes. You also testified that Daniel Carter did not want to be cruel. Yes. Did you consider it cruel when Mr. Carter discussed moving marital assets before the divorce was finalized? Vanessa blinked. I do not know what you mean. Rebecca handed a copy of the email to the clerk, then to Vanessa. This email is dated September 18th, 3 weeks before Daniel filed for divorce. It is from Mr. Carter to you. Please read the highlighted sentence silently first. Vanessa looked down. The color in her face changed in degrees, not dramatically, not enough for a scene, but enough for everyone watching to understand that the paper had teeth. Now read it aloud, Rebecca said. Vanessa's voice was soft. Once the Rutledge property is shielded, Emily will have no leverage. A sound moved through the gallery, not a gasp exactly, more like a room full of people discovering too late that they had chosen the wrong side and would now have to pretend they had always been neutral. Daniel leaned toward Preston, whispering fast. Judge Whitmore lifted her eyes. Mr. Carter, you will remain silent unless addressed. Rebecca continued. Ms. Cole, did you respond to that email? Vanessa swallowed. I do not remember. You wrote, quote, good, because she does not deserve the house after making you miserable. Preston stood. Your Honor, counsel is editorializing. Counsel is reading, Judge Whitmore said. Sit down, Mr. Vale. Emily kept her gaze lowered, but she could feel the room shifting again, chair by chair, breath by breath. It was strange, hearing the machinery of her erasure described in calm legal language. During the divorce, Daniel had made her feel unreasonable for suspecting strategy. Now strategy was sitting under fluorescent lights with timestamps, sender addresses, and Vanessa's polished signature at the bottom. Rebecca placed another document before Vanessa. Do you recognize this text exchange between you and Mr. Carter from October 2nd? Vanessa's hand tightened on the paper. It appears to be a conversation. A conversation in which you advised Mr. Carter to have the company accountant remove references to Emily's funds because, in your words, it would complicate the clean break. Vanessa looked at Daniel again, but Daniel was staring at the table as if the wood grain had suddenly become legally fascinating. I was repeating what Daniel told me, she said. So you were aware that Mrs. Carter's funds existed? The question landed gently. Too gently. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. Rebecca waited. Judge Whitmore waited. Emily waited too, but not the way she once had, not with fear, not with a wife's desperate hope that Daniel might choose decency at the last possible second. She waited like someone watching a locked door finally open from the inside. I knew there had been money, Vanessa said at last. I did not know the details. Rebecca nodded. But you told this court Mrs. Carter had no legitimate reason to question the estate documents. Vanessa's eyes flickered. I believed that at the time. At the time being 40 minutes ago? A few people in the back row shifted. Even the clerk's typing paused for half a beat. Rebecca stepped away from the witness stand and returned to her table. She still had not touched the sealed envelope. Daniel saw that too. His confidence, once polished and effortless, had become visibly expensive to maintain. Rebecca placed the email chain beside the bank records and looked at Judge Whitmore. Your Honor, these documents show that Mr. Carter and Ms. Cole were aware of Mrs. Carter's financial contributions, discussed shielding property before the divorce, and later testified in ways that conflict with those records. But this is not the final evidence. She rested her hand at last on the sealed envelope. The courtroom became so quiet Emily could hear the faint buzz of the lights above them. Rebecca broke the seal with a slow, deliberate motion that seemed to pull every breath in the courtroom toward her hands. The envelope was not dramatic by itself, just thick manila paper with Eleanor Carter's name written across the front in blue ink, but it had the effect of a church bell in a small town. Everyone understood something was about to be announced, and no one could pretend they had not heard it. Inside were 3 items: a notarized statement, a certified copy of a trust amendment, and a flash drive sealed in a clear evidence sleeve. Rebecca placed them on the table one by one, neat as silverware, because apparently even the end of a lie should be properly arranged. Your Honor, she said, these materials were recovered from a safe deposit box opened pursuant to Eleanor Carter's written instructions. The bank records have been verified. The statement was executed before 2 witnesses and a notary. The video file was recorded in my office 7 months before Mrs. Carter's passing, while she was under no medical restriction affecting competency. Preston stood, but the strength had gone out of him. Your Honor, we object to any video presentation without an opportunity for review. Rebecca turned slightly. Mr. Vale received the inventory notice 10 days ago and declined inspection, stating in writing that the materials were, quote, irrelevant theatrics. Judge Whitmore looked over her glasses. That was unwise. It was the politest judicial way imaginable to say someone had stepped on a rake in a rented tuxedo. Preston sat down. Daniel did not look at him. Vanessa did. That was worse. Rebecca handed copies of the notarized statement to the clerk and opposing counsel, then faced the judge. The statement identifies Emily Carter as the source of separate funds used for both the Rutledge Avenue property and the stabilization of Carter Development. It also explains Eleanor Carter's reason for naming Mrs. Carter as a beneficiary. Judge Whitmore read silently for nearly a minute. The courtroom held still. Emily could hear her own heartbeat, steady but heavy, like footsteps in an empty hallway. She did not look at Daniel. She looked at Eleanor's signature at the bottom of the copy Rebecca had placed before her. Strong, slanted, unmistakable. The hand of a woman who had not been confused. The hand of a woman who had waited. Rebecca then requested permission to play the video. The screen near the jury box flickered on, and Eleanor appeared seated in Rebecca's office, wearing a gray cardigan, pearl earrings, and the same expression she had worn at every family dinner: composed, severe, almost bored by the possibility that anyone might doubt her. Her voice filled the courtroom, thinner than Emily remembered, but clear. My name is Eleanor Patricia Carter. I am making this statement because my son Daniel has confused inheritance with entitlement, and I have no interest in rewarding that confusion after my death. A sound escaped someone in the gallery, quickly swallowed. Daniel's face went pale in patches. On the screen, Eleanor continued. She explained that Emily had contributed separate funds from her father's estate to the Rutledge Avenue purchase. She named the amounts. She named the dates. She described the Savannah project and the emergency transfers that kept Carter Development from defaulting. On contractor obligations, she said Daniel had instructed his accountant to remove visible references to Emily's money before refinancing, and she had kept the email because she knew her son would eventually mistake deletion for innocence. Even in death, Eleanor had excellent timing and absolutely no mercy for sloppy paperwork. Then her expression changed. It softened, not much, but enough that Emily felt the years fold inward. Emily Carter did not manipulate me, Eleanor said. She protected my son longer than he deserved. She protected this family's reputation while being erased from the work that saved it. If I leave her property, it is not charity. It is correction. Emily's eyes burned, but she did not cry. Not there. Not while Daniel sat 12 feet away watching the version of his mother. He could not flatter, pressure, or interrupt. Rebecca paused the video only after Eleanor stated that she had amended the trust voluntarily, knowingly, and against Daniel's anticipated objections. Judge Whitmore removed her glasses and placed them on the bench. Mr. Carter, she said, is there anything you wish to clarify about your earlier testimony? Daniel opened his mouth. No answer came. For a man who had spent years controlling the story, silence looked deeply uncomfortable on him. Vanessa stared at the table. Caroline Carter had gone still in the first row, her face drained of its old certainty. Emily finally looked at Daniel then, not with triumph, not with hatred, but with the calm exhaustion of someone watching a storm pass over a house she no longer lived in. The truth had arrived without shouting. It had entered with dates, signatures, bank records, and one dead woman's unwavering voice. Rebecca rested her hand lightly on the folder and said, Your Honor, we ask that the court admit the materials into evidence, deny the petition to invalidate Eleanor Carter's amendment, and order a temporary freeze on disputed assets pending full review. Judge Whitmore looked around the courtroom, then back at Daniel. Granted, the word was small. The effect was not. For several seconds after Judge Whitmore granted the order, no one moved, as if the courtroom itself needed time to understand that the world had tilted and Daniel Carter had not been invited to approve the angle. The clerk began typing again, each keystroke crisp and practical, because life has a rude habit of continuing even after a man's carefully curated reputation begins shedding pieces in public. Preston Vale gathered his papers too quickly, then slowed down when he realized everyone could see his hands were not as steady as they had been at 9 o'clock. Vanessa remained seated, her purse clutched in both hands, staring at Daniel with the bright, frightened focus of someone recalculating the cost of loyalty. Daniel did not look at her. He was watching Emily. Not angrily, not exactly. Anger would have been easier. This was confusion, the kind that appears when a person who has spent years writing the script suddenly discovers another character kept the original pages. Judge Whitmore addressed the room with the flat calm of a woman who had seen enough family wealth turned into public nonsense to last several lifetimes. The disputed assets would be frozen pending full accounting. The trust amendment would remain valid unless Daniel could produce evidence stronger than wounded pride dressed as legal argument. Carter Development's relevant financial records would be subject to review. Any further misrepresentation to the court would be treated seriously. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Authority, when real, does not perform push-ups in the mirror. Emily listened without smiling. The victory did not feel like fireworks. It felt like breathing after years underwater, painful at first, almost unfamiliar. Rebecca touched the documents into a neat stack and leaned toward her. You did well, she said quietly. Emily almost laughed. She had done nothing, at least nothing the room could see. She had sat still while Daniel called her irrelevant. She had swallowed every reflex to defend herself. She had let the evidence do what her pain never could. Maybe that was doing well. Maybe restraint was not emptiness. Maybe it was discipline with better manners. When court recessed, the gallery broke into murmurs. People who had avoided Emily's eyes all morning suddenly seemed fascinated by the floor, their phones, the ceiling vents, anything except the woman they had been prepared to pity. Caroline Carter stood as if she meant to approach, then changed her mind, which was likely the wisest decision she had made all day and possibly all decade. Vanessa left first, her heels clicking fast across the aisle, Daniel following a few steps behind before stopping near Emily's table. "Emily," he said. Her name in his mouth still sounded familiar, but it no longer had ownership in it. That was new. Rebecca stayed beside her, but did not interfere. Daniel looked older than he had that morning, the lines around his eyes deeper, his confidence wrinkled at the edges. "I did not know she had recorded that," he said. It was such a perfect Daniel sentence that Emily almost admired it. "Not I lied. Not I am sorry. Not you deserve better." Only surprised that the truth had been preserved without his permission. "That is the part that bothers you?" she asked. His face tightened. "This will damage the company." Emily looked past him toward the high courtroom windows, where afternoon light had begun to soften the hard edges of the room. For years, she had mistaken his emergencies for love. His reputation, his company, his comfort, his future, all of it had been placed in her arms until she could barely carry herself. Now he stood there offering her the old burden again, as if habit might make her reach for it. She did not. "I did not come here to destroy you, Daniel," she said. "I came here to stop letting you destroy me." The words did not echo. Real words rarely do. They simply landed and stayed. Daniel had no answer. Emily picked up her purse, thanked Rebecca, and walked out of the courtroom with the brass key tucked safely inside. Outside, Charleston was bright and humid, the kind of afternoon that made the pavement shimmer and the air smell faintly of salt, exhaust, and blooming jasmine. Emily stood on the courthouse steps and let the heat touch her face. She thought of Eleanor on the porch, magnolia petals falling around her shoes, telling her to let Daniel finish. He had finished. At last, so had she, and for the first time in years. The silence around Emily did not feel like something taken from her. It felt like something she owned. The court order did not give Emily everything back in a single afternoon, because justice, like most institutions designed by humans, preferred forms, delays, and the emotional efficiency of a broken printer. There would be accountants, amended filings, asset reviews, and meetings in rooms where people used phrases like forensic reconciliation as if they were discussing a weather pattern instead of years of deception. But something essential had shifted before Emily ever received $1 or signed a single new document. The story had changed. Daniel could no longer walk into a room and let silence protect him. Vanessa could no longer smile beside him as if the past were just an inconvenient rumor in a dress. The Carter family could no longer pretend Emily had been a decorative chapter in Daniel's life, useful when photographed, disposable when inconvenient. 2 weeks after the hearing, Rebecca called Emily into her office to review the first accounting report. Carter Development's books showed exactly what Eleanor had predicted they would show: messy transfers, renamed accounts, property interests moved with the kind of confidence that only survives when no one expects a quiet woman to keep a key. Emily sat across from Rebecca as afternoon rain tapped softly against the windows. "This may take months," Rebecca said. "Possibly longer if Daniel contests every step." Emily looked at the report, at the columns of numbers that had once represented sleepless nights, sacrificed inheritances, swallowed questions, and the strange economics of loving someone who treated devotion like free labor. "Let him," she said. Rebecca studied her over the rim of her glasses. "You are prepared for that." Emily thought of the old version of herself, the one who would have dreaded every letter, every hearing, every whispered comment in a grocery aisle. That woman had not been weak. She had simply been exhausted from carrying a marriage that kept pretending it was a partnership. "I am prepared to stop being afraid of paperwork," Emily said. It turns out paperwork was afraid of Rebecca Hayes. Rebecca's mouth twitched. Reasonable fear. By spring, Charleston had begun to bloom again. Jasmine climbed fences. Tourists filled the sidewalks with cameras and sunburns. The magnolia tree at the Rutledge Avenue house dropped its first white blossoms of the season. Emily saw a photograph of it online when the property was temporarily removed from a private listing Daniel had tried to arrange before the hearing. For a moment, she expected grief to rise sharp and immediate. Instead, there was only a small ache, clean around the edges. The house had held parts of her life, but it was not her life. Daniel had taken walls, floors, reputation, and years. He had not taken the woman who had survived losing them. One Saturday morning, Emily drove to the farmer's market in Marion Square and bought peaches, flowers, and a loaf of sourdough bread she did not need but wanted anyway, which is one of civilization's few harmless luxuries. Near the fountain, Caroline Carter spotted her and froze with a canvas tote over one arm. For a second, Emily saw the old pattern forming, the careful smile, the shallow apology, the social calculation disguised as remorse. Emily gave her a polite nod and kept walking. Not every conversation deserves a courtroom. Not every wound needs an audience. A month later, a letter arrived from Daniel's new attorney. The tone was professional, stripped of Preston Vale's theatrical perfume. Daniel was willing to discuss settlement terms. Daniel was interested in avoiding prolonged public proceedings. Daniel hoped all parties could move forward with dignity. Emily read the letter twice at her kitchen table in Mount Pleasant, the same table where she had first opened Eleanor's notice. Then she placed it neatly in a folder and called Rebecca. "Tell them I am willing to discuss accuracy," she said. "Dignity can wait its turn." That evening, Emily walked onto her balcony as the sun settled over the low rooftops and the air turned gold. The parking lot below was still just a parking lot. The refrigerator inside still hummed too loudly. Nothing looked like the dramatic ending people imagine when truth finally wins. There was no grand staircase, no crowd applauding, no music swelling at precisely the correct emotional temperature. There was only a woman standing in the warm South Carolina dusk, holding a glass of iced tea, understanding at last that peace did not need to look impressive to be real. Eleanor had left her evidence, but she had also left her a lesson sharper than any document in that courtroom. Love without respect becomes labor. Silence without evidence becomes erasure. But silence with truth behind it can become power. Emily looked out toward the soft purple line of evening and felt, for the first time in years, not restored to who she had been, but released into who she was becoming.